Hey everyone, and welcome to your C++ tutorial on functions. So let's begin by deleting our hello world instruction, and let's start with a definition of what is a function. So a function is a set of instructions bundled together to achieve a specific task. So a function is a set of instructions, so a few lines of instructions, bundled together into the same scope to achieve a specific task. And so I'd like to distinguish a function here from a method in C++. A function is a sort of like freestanding set of instructions that are bundled together, and a method is the same thing except it's part of a class. So a method is part of a class, and a function is a freestanding set of instructions. So let's take a look at the syntax. So I'm going to create some space up here, and a function always begins with the type that you're going to return. And there's, functions that return a value, and then there's functions that don't return a value. In the case of functions that return a value, you'll just put the type of the value it'll return at the start of the function. So we'll create a function that will return an integer, and we will call this addition. So you can see our function here. It's going to return an integer, it's going to return a number, and then we give it the human readable name here of addition. From here, we have our name, so now we are going to open up a parenthesis and close parenthesis, and this is where we'll put our parameters. So the parameters are going to be values that we pass into our function. So they're inputs into our function, and each of those inputs, for each of those inputs, we're going to specify a type, and we'll give each input a name. So we're going to take two inputs into our addition function, and this function is just going to perform the addition operation. So we're going to take in two inputs of numbers, and we're going to add those two numbers together. So, and then we're going to return that. So we have our integer type here, and that's our return type. Now I need to give each parameter a type. So each parameter is going to be an integer. And so one parameter is going to be on the left side of the addition operator, and one parameter is going to be on the right side. So I'm going to call them left and right. Left. And I'm going to create another parameter here, another integer called right. And so now we have our return type, our name, the open and close parentheses that are for our parameters. We have our parameters. We have two parameters here. You can have any number of parameters or no parameters at all. And so our parameters are integers, so they're numbers. We're calling them left and right. Now we need to write our instructions. So to do that, we need to create a scope for where our instructions begin and end. And for that, we have curly braces. So curly braces show scope in C++. And so our function starts here and ends here. So it's only going to have one line. And like I said, we're going to return, or we're going to output an integer. So we're going to output a number. And to do that, we use the keyword return. And so what return does is it outputs something from our function, and it ends our function's instructions. So if you ever hit a return in your function, that'll exit your function. So we're going to return left plus right. And we'll end it with a semicolon. So that's a pretty simple instruction. The user is going to pass in left, a number on the left and a number on the right, and we're going to add those two numbers together and return it. Awesome. So let's go. This is basically the syntax for any type of function. You have your return type. You have your name, your human readable name. You have your space for parameters here, and you have your parameters. And each parameter gets a type and a name. And whenever you add another one, you separate it with a comma and add another one here. Then we have our open scope, which is the start of our instructions. we have our instruction here. This return keyword means that we're going to output this value, and the value is, is going to be an integer, which matches our return type here. And then we have the end of our scope. Awesome. So that's the syntax for our function. Now let's invoke our function in our main function here. So to do that, all we do is we call it by its human readable name. We just say addition. We open and close our parameter list here. And so if we tried to run this, since we didn't give it any parameters, this would not work. We need to give it parameters, and I'm going to give it a 2 and a 2. So here we have our addition function, and our first parameter is 2, and our second parameter is 2. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to use our cout method here, and we're going to output the result of our addition function. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to compile this in our G++ compiler. It compiles, and I'm going to run our executable. We can see it's output 4 here. So this is an example of how to use the function that we declared up here. Now there's something I like to point out in C++, that if we're going to have a freestanding function like this in the same file as main, it has to be declared above the main method. Our program starts here, and so everything our program uses, every function our program uses, if it's in the same file, it needs to be declared above the main function, so that if you can imagine, the compiler is reading this line by line, and it's processing it line by line. So when it gets to the main function, it needs to know what addition is, right? So if we put addition down here below the main function, this isn't going to work because, remember, it's processing line by line, and we get to addition here, but we don't know what addition is because we haven't gotten to this line yet. So if I try to compile this using our G++ compiler, we're going to throw an error here, and it's going to say use of undeclared identifier addition, right? So this is our function declaration, but because we've used it before we've declared it, the compiler throws an error, right? So let's move this back. I'm going to cut that and paste it up here, and clear our terminal, use our G++ compiler, and now it compiles successfully, and we can run our executable fine, right? Because we've declared it before we've invoked it in our function. Okay, so that was how you declare a function with a return type. And this return type can be any type, right? So it can be an integer, it could be a string, it could be a Boolean. If we create a class that creates a type, it can be that custom class. It can be anything. Now, what if you don't want to return a type, right? So if you don't want to return a type, like you want to just perform some instructions and then output nothing or return nothing, then you can use the type of void. Right? So void means there's no type, right? You can think of a void as the absence of anything. And so let's create a void function here. So I'm going to just delete our addition function, and I'm going to delete our instruction that prints out the addition, the result of the addition function. So let's create a void function. So this is going to be a function with no return type, and let's call it greeting. Now, we could create this greeting function with no parameters, and we could just output with our cout method here. We could just output hello world, and we could just run that down here. We can just call greeting, and this would basically be the equivalent of the hello world program that we always start our instructionals out with, right? This would be basically the equivalent. So if we compile this and we run it, we just see hello world. And so, a void function works the same way as a function that returns a type, except that it just doesn't return anything. You just perform the instructions inside of your curly braces here. So yeah, this is your introduction to functions in C++. I hope you learned something. Thanks.